Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. The first day of spring term classes at Colorado Mountain College, we opt, rather than to celebrate this as a holiday, we opt to be on and attending classes and having dialogue on this very important day. I'm Carrie Hauser. I'm president of Colorado Mountain College. The first thing I want to do, of course, is to recognize and to remember the late Dr. and Reverend Martin Luther King for his enduring legacy, which is what brings us together today. Saturday would have been Dr. King's 93rd birthday. I also want to extend sincere thanks to our internal team for pulling together a meaningful day of reflection and action. This includes, and you know who you are, our internal ILT and DEI teams. Thank you so much. Also, a special thanks to Patrick Stabe, Matt Gianeschi, Jeremiah Johnson, and Kevin Williams for their contributions to today's event and Friday's follow-up coffee and conversations, which will be for our students, our faculty, and our staff. And certainly to Richard Gonzalez, who serves as CMC's General Counsel and our Senior Officer for Inclusivity and Diversity, for helping to shepherd today's program and for his dedication to CMC's inclusivity efforts. And to members of the public out there who've joined us for this event, we welcome you. We certainly hope that today's event is meaningful and an authentic example of CMC's commitment to inclusivity, equity, and expansion, and to recognize, understand, and reconcile past injustices. CMC is fortunate to be the beneficiary of nearly 1,300 acres of land in a spectacular chunk of Colorado's central Rocky Mountains. We operate, as many of you know, 11 campuses, plus our central administrative offices in a 9-county region spanning 12,000 square miles. During my tenure and previously, we've recognized and appreciated the very generous landowners who've made CMC's growth, presence, and impact possible. What we haven't done adequately is learn about and reflect upon the longer-term history of this land and all that it encompasses, and how we more meaningfully and humbly acknowledge our heritage. While we don't yet have a playbook for what this journey will look like, there are at least a few timely opportunities in the coming year. In the early 1970s, CMC acquired 35 acres of land in Montezuma County, in the heart of the Four Corners region and the ancestral home of the Ute Mountain Utes. Over time and periodically, students and faculty have visited this parcel as part of their courses or their fieldwork. I've had a few opportunities to walk this parcel and to understand its historical and archaeological significance. The CMC Board of Trustees is currently discussing whether CMC is the proper owner of this parcel or whether it might be otherwise entrusted. Second, we have recently announced, and we're very excited about, a new bachelor's program coming online this fall in ecosystem science and stewardship. How we incorporate indigenous perspectives in this new program from its inception is a rare and important opportunity. On a personal note, before I turn it over, many of you know that I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, which resides in Coconino County and is now home to all or part of 5 reservations: the Navajo, the Hopi, the Havasupai, the Wallapai, and the Kaibab. As the daughter of 2 educators who exposed me to the rich Native American history of this region and to what has become a lifelong love affair with the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River, this work and today's conversation is deeply significant to me. I'm confident we will do it well and in our uniquely Colorado Mountain College way. So to help us initiate and frame this journey, it's hard to conceive of anyone more qualified to speak on this topic today than our keynote speaker, Ernest House, Jr., who will be introduced in more detail shortly. Ernest is a friend and a colleague, and someone I'm working very closely with during my term as chair of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission, as he and his colleagues at the Keystone Policy Center help facilitate our effort to restore the gray wolf to Colorado. He has a wealth of experience in his personal upbringing and his professional career, and has graciously agreed to share his story and to engage in a discussion with us on some of the issues faced by the Ute Tribe in Colorado. We've reserved time for questions and discussion, so please use the question and answer feature today to ask those. And I'll now hand it off to Jeremiah Johnson, who will describe plans for coffee and conversation follow-up on Friday. And then Dr. Matt Gianeschi will introduce Mr. House and our facilitator, Associate Professor, Dr. Patrick Stabe. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for your leadership in creating this wonderful event for Colorado Mountain College and the communities we serve. Thank you also, Matt and Richard, for your support in developing our second college-wide Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Beyond Acknowledgments, Understanding CMC's Land Heritage and Seeding the Future. Also, thank you to Ernest House Jr. We are honored and excited to learn from your wisdom. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically." The DEI ILT group is continuing our work to create a safe space for open and respectful dialogue. We have developed a series of 3 coffee and conversations to allow us the time to talk about this year's MLK theme. The first will be this Friday, January 21st at 11:30 a.m. A Zoom link will be provided. The following coffee and conversations are designed to go a bit deeper on this year's MLK theme. The second will focus on land treaties and policy, and the third will be to celebrate what we do well now and what we can do better in seeding the future. The Coffee and Conversations event this Friday will focus on land history and its cultural significance. Our very own Patrick Stabe and Kevin Williams will facilitate along with members of the DEI ILT group. We look forward to seeing you all there and to go further our intensive and critical thinking on CMC's land heritage and how we can go beyond acknowledgments and seed the future. Thank you all again. And now I would like to turn the platform over to Matt Gianeschi.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I am Matt Gianeschi. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Colorado Mountain College, and I have the great good fortune to introduce 2 individuals whom I admire greatly. Before introducing today's guests, please let me add my sincere welcome back to all CMC faculty, staff, and most important, our students. In honor of Dr. King's vision of education and as a representative of a college that constantly strives to be more just, more equitable, and more impactful to its students and communities, it is a true privilege for me to introduce today's guests. I've not only known both gentlemen for years, but revealing the myriad bridges that connect all of us, I have personal connections to both in ways that may not be obvious. First, Dr. Patrick Stabe is a professor of social sciences at the Colorado Mountain College Steamboat Springs campus. He specializes in cultural anthropology and is an affiliated faculty member with the college's Sustainability Studies program. Patrick is a native of the Philadelphia suburbs and attended Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. In college, Patrick honored the creator as a member of the Dickinson lacrosse team. I too played lacrosse at the very same time and have the concussions to prove it. After Dickinson, Dr. Stabe attended the University of New Mexico, where he earned a Master of Arts and a Doctor of Philosophy in Anthropology and Latin American Studies. Patrick not only studies the anthropological origins of cultures, but had a firsthand experience in cultural integration and adaptation, having been raised by a father from Germany and a mother from Nicaragua. Internally to CMC, Patrick has been among the college's most engaged faculty, serving as the college-wide Faculty Senate President and participating in the college's LIFT program. Most uniquely, perhaps, Patrick is likely the only CMC employee to have ever been awarded an Emmy. Dr. Stabe received his award in 2018 in the Lifestyle Program Special category for his work on A Taste of History's Season 9, Episode 9, Nicaragua, Flavors of the Pinoleros. Not to be outdone by his son, Patrick's father, Walter, also earned an Emmy in the same season. Must make for interesting dinner time conversations. While I know Patrick will be among the most dedicated and thoughtful professionals in the college, I also know that he takes himself less seriously, maintaining a sincerely welcoming approachability and self-deprecating sense of humor, which I'm sure will be obvious to all very shortly. I have known our guest speaker, Ernest House Jr., for going on 20 years. He and I both served concurrently in executive roles in 3 consecutive governor's administrations, going back to the early 2000s. Ernest was the executive director for the Colorado Commission on Indian Affairs, the CCIA, for over 11 years, which is actually the agency in which I completed my undergraduate internship. As the state's executive director of the CCIA, Ernest maintained communication between the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Indian Tribe and other American Indian organizations, state agencies, and affiliated groups. He worked closely with the executive branch, individuals, and agencies to maintain a government-to-government relationship between the state of Colorado and tribal governments. Ernest is currently the Senior Policy Director for the Keystone Policy Center, where he works with various stakeholders in the areas of tribal consultation, energy, healthcare, and education. He was a 2012 Marshall Memorial Fellow from America, which is actually the year after I was a Marshall Fellow, a 2013 Denver Business Journal 40 Under 40 awardee, 2015 President's Award recipient from History Colorado, and 2018 Gates Family Foundation Public Leadership Fellow. Ernest is currently the chair of the Fort Lewis College Board of Trustees, an advisor to the Mesa Verde Foundation and the Global Livingston Institute. Ernest is an enrolled member of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe in Towaoc, Colorado. He is the son of the late Ernest House Sr., a longtime tribal leader for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and former member of the Colorado National Guard, graduating from the Army's Jump School and becoming an airborne paratrooper, and the great-grandson of Chief Jack House, the last hereditary chief of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. Without further ado, it is my sincere privilege to introduce to the Colorado Mountain College community my good friend, Ernest House Jr.
Matt, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you all. Mike Duguv and the Towaoc means hello, my friends in Ute. I want to make sure that I have everything ready to go here. I'm going to be sharing my screen for a presentation. But before I start, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize President Hauser, Matt Gianeschi, Jeremiah Johnson, Kevin Williams, Patrick Stabe, Richard Gonzalez, and the team that has supported and invited me to do this opportunity. Obviously, any kind of opportunity is a big honor to speak at events like this to any group. But on a day like today, when we honor Dr. King and the message and the legacy that he continues to bring to us, I'm very, very humbled and appreciate the Towaoc. Thank you for that opportunity. And I want to also say my appreciation to the faculty, the staff, and the students at CMC. I've been on the Fort Lewis College Board of Trustees for the last 8 years. I'm serving another 4-year term. That has been such an eye-opener about just how higher education, the challenges, obviously the last couple of years with the pandemic, and just how to really lift up the opportunity for the future generations. And we're going to get more into that. But seeing behind the scenes, I really do appreciate everything that the faculty, the staff, and the students continue to do to change the message, right? To change the trajectory for future students and CMC's history. So I'm glad that we're going to jump right into this. So given that, I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to go over a few different things first. And then I'm going to start off here. Let me just minimize my screen here. Hopefully you're all able to see that. Hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear. I'll look to to our team too to text me if that's not, if it's good. So this is such an interesting opportunity. Because beyond acknowledgments and what President Hauser talked about and what CMC is discussing right now, moving into the future, understanding the land heritage and seeing that future, but the connection with today and why I think that is even bigger of an opportunity is that I've put up here this quote, and especially like today, if you've already seen social media, everyone's posting their favorite Dr. King quote and continuing that message. This is one that always sticks in my mind as a Native American, as somebody who's worked in public policy. This really is one that I always refer back to, not just on MLK Day, but the fact that our nation, and I'm gonna go ahead and read this as well, our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American Indian, the Indian, was an inferior race, even before there were large numbers of Negroes on our shores. The scar of racial hatred had already disfigured colonial society. From the 16th century forward, blood flowed in battles of racial supremacy. We are perhaps the only nation which tried as a matter of national policy to wipe out its indigenous population. Moreover, we elevated that tragic experience into a noble crusade. Indeed, even today, we have not permitted ourselves to reject or feel remorse for this shameful episode. Our literature, our films, our drama, our folklore, all exalt that. And of course, this was, maybe you've read this before, maybe you've seen this quote, but it's in Dr. King's book, Why We Can't Wait in 1963. I encourage you to look at that. But the other interesting connection here is that if you work with Indian country, and I'm going to reference Indian country, meaning tribes throughout the United States, 570 plus tribes, Native American organizations, advocacy groups, Native American Rights Fund, Indian Education, National Indian Education Association, all today have been also honoring Dr. King. And through that process, we all are recognizing that American Indian rights, American Indian movement, the efforts in the 60s and definitely going on to the 70s, we would not be here if Dr. King had not also elevated this conversation for Native Americans. If you did not know, Dr. King actually helped out tribes in the South with regards to some Native American students that were light-skinned and dark-skinned, that were either getting bused or not getting bused, and really advocated around that conversation at the same time segregation was going on and the desegregation of school buses. And so tribes are involved in this conversation as well. After that process, of course, a lot of times the organizations are being built. Native American Rights Fund, just one of those that advocates on Native issues throughout the country, headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. And all of this really kind of led into, if you follow history, the passage of the Indian Self-Determination Act in the 1970s. I find it a strong connection to what we've seen over the last few years around DEI, around Black Lives Matter movement, giving way for indigenous issues, giving way and space for us as indigenous people to have this type of conversation. And so I'm going to get into that here in a minute. So for me, my family, as Matt had mentioned, I would not be here, obviously, if it was not for the shoulders that I have the opportunity to stand on. And those are giants, not just tribal elected officials, family members, but folks who've been mentors to me in my career, my process, my upbringing. And these two individuals are pretty key in my life. The individual on the left is Chief Jack House. As Matt mentioned, he was the last hereditary chief of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, our band, and he died in 1971. And when he died with the title. We don't have chiefs that carry on with that title anymore. We now have elections. Every year is an election year. We'll get into that in just a little bit. And then the individual on the right is my father, the late Ernest House Sr. He was the longest serving tribal elected official for my tribe, serving over 35 years in an elected capacity. The interesting thing here is that Chief Jack House raised my father. And then my father later on, as he was growing up, was an interpreter for Chief Jack House. And so they would get on the train in Gallup, New Mexico, and take them 3 days to get to Washington, D.C. And that's where they would advocate for Ute water rights settlement. This is when the Ute water rights settlement did not pass. And my father learned so much of the history of not just the Ute history, but American history, democracy, how Capitol Hill works, through working with Chief Jack House. So I usually start here in this conversation, who are the Utes? Really, we're 7 bands. We're more than that, but let's just start with the 7, because I feel like that's probably where a lot of folks have either seen these names, heard of these names. They're national forests, there's rivers, you name it. But a lot of people don't realize that they're actually people that are connected to that. Those several bands have consolidated today to make up the 3 Ute tribes that we have. The Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, which is my tribe, located in Towaoc, Colorado, the Wee-Manooch Band. The Southern Ute Indian Tribe, located in Ignacio, Colorado, makes up 2 of those bands, Mowatch-Capote Band. And then the other 4 bands who were forcibly removed from the state of Colorado, before it was a state, by the way, is the Northern Ute Indian Tribe located in Fort Duchesne, Utah. So this green dotted line that you see in front of you represent the distance that the Utes would travel. Now, these lines of states are just to give you a way to see where location of these states were, but of course they were not there. And the political lines of states wouldn't have been developed at the time. But the red dotted line is really where our Utes would have stayed mostly for the majority of the time. Now, the Utes were one of the first tribes to acquire the horse from the Spanish. So by the time the horse was acquired, it was really, a lot of people reference the Utes as people of the Shining Mountains. We're nomadic. So many trails, so much movement with hunting and fishing and game and following that game, but mostly through the mountains of Colorado. And, you know, I'd like to say, thanks to the Utes, we have I-70, 285, some of these highways that have cut through our mountain ranges that have been utilized. And if you'd ask anthropologists and archaeologists, I mean, Professor Stade, maybe in a little bit, that Colorado archaeologists and anthropologists will tell you that they believe Utes have been in here, what we call Colorado, for the last 10 to 12,000 years. 10 to 12,000 years. But if you'd ask me, or if you'd ask anybody from my tribe or our elders, our medicine people, they'll tell you that we've been here since time immemorial, meaning before there was ever any type of recording. You know, these mountains are so important to us. This territory that you see, that we see every day, the Colorado Mountain College campuses are located on. We believe our songs are still in these trees. They're still in the wind. Our stories are still in the water. It's written on the landscape. And our language that we speak today still reflects that. So here are the bands of those 7 bands that would have migrated through that area of Western Colorado and really throughout the state. Just to give you an idea that we still have hunting blinds still standing in Rocky Mountain National Park up in Estes Park. The last bear dance was in Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs in the early 1900s until we were forcibly removed. We have wiki-ups, which were temporary housing structures, hundreds still standing throughout the west of the Rocky Mountains through Colorado. So a quick map just to give you an idea of places, locations around the state that you may have seen, that you may have noticed. The green dots just resemble those place locations to give you something for reference. I would say that, so the first Ute territory was before the state of Colorado, right? And so far before 1876, but then we started seeing the first Ute reservation being established in 1868. This is when Utes were being forced into this area that you see, this blue line. No longer could we go to the Glenwood area. No longer could we go to the Vail Valley. No longer could we go to those hunting blinds that were standing up for thousands of years at Rocky Mountain National Park, or even back to places, spiritual locations like Garden of the Gods. This is the area we were confined to. Now, this is just the Ute story. There's many other tribes that had similar stories and treaties that signed either removing them from the state or completely eradicating their history and culture along the way. Then soon after that, you'll see that this was the renegotiated treaty. We call it the Bruno Agreement. Actually, if you've been to southwestern Colorado, you know that the San Juans are right there. And so the other stipulation of this treaty was that the Utes could not leave the area or seek special permission, but non-natives, non-Utes could not come onto that area. Well, that was quickly challenged, because if you've been to southwestern Colorado or the San Juans, you know that there are over 400 miles of tunnels due to mining of ore and silver in those areas. And so because the federal government cannot keep non-Utes out of the area, they renegotiated this treaty, and it's called the Bruno Area, and it's actually still in process today, because our Utes can continue to hunt and fish and gather in this area, which is about 2 million acres of that carved out area. Then there was an incident called the Meeker incident with Nathan Meeker. We're going to get to that. I'll circle back to that in a minute. But by the late 1880s, we call it the Ute Strip. The 4 northern Ute bands after the Meeker incident were forcibly, by gunpoint, forced out of the state of Colorado to what is now the state of Utah. The other 3 Ute bands moved to the south, and both resided on this Ute Strip. And here we have our reservation lines today. The blue is the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, my tribe, and then the red is the Southern Indian Tribe in Ignacio. There's a great exhibit at History Colorado, and that we established and worked for many years with the tribes on. And one of the best quotes, and I encourage you to go check it out, and also at the Ute Museum in Montrose, Colorado. One of the interesting things that you'll see, there's a quote by one of our elders, that in talking about this exhibit and talking about this land loss map, and like so many other tribes know, all too familiar, we have lived in what we call Colorado for the last 10 to 12,000 years. Let's just take the archaeologist, anthropologist comment as a starting point. And 10 to 12,000 years. Yet in the 1800s, we lost Colorado in 40. In a matter of moment, when the first treaty was signed to the late 1800s, then we start seeing other things like boarding schools being developed, which we'll get to in a minute as well. And now we're confined to this land down here. So when we talk about land acknowledgments, beyond acknowledgments, this is a part of it. Understanding the true history of the indigenous cultures, it also means this. It's not just our song and our dance and everything from our cultural values. It's the political process. And just like Dr. King mentioned in his quote, at that time in the 60s, how true that still stays today. Here's just some demographics for you to let you know about the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe and Southern Ute Tribe today. My tribe, a little over 2,000 enrolled members. We're a small tribe, 600,000 acres in 3 states. We're a communal land-owned reservation. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a 7-member governing council where election years every year. It's all staggered. Our chairman has served 3-year terms. Our council served 2-year terms. And this last one is also one of those that continues to be a hot button issue throughout all of tribes that still require membership like this. But my tribe has a very high blood quantum rate, half blood to full blood. And it's interesting, especially now, I won't get into this, but even me personally, I've talked about how my own family has been impacted by that. My own kids my grandkids, my great-grandkids, eventually that will not adhere to that. So when they go through and see awesome pictures and history, exhibits, books, stained glass pictures in the state capitol, they're going to see their great-grandfather, their great-great-grandfather. They're going to hear about their father or their family members who fought for Native issues. And yet one day they may see they're not a member. And what does it take to be a member? What does it take to be Indian these days? And so this is very much an ongoing conversation that we need to continue to have. The Southern Ute Indian Tribe, as you see the information right below, very similar, and just wanted to show those along with you. And we can get to some more of this in the Q&A portion of this. So if you were wondering, just doing a quick time check here. When I made the mention earlier that this is just the Ute story, this is the Ute history that we provide, that I provide to everybody. And in 2007, the state of Colorado was the first state to initiate a process to ensure that Native American human remains that could not be culturally identified with a particular tribe, that they would not continue to sit on shelves. And prior to 2007, every state, not just Colorado, dealt with this. We had over 400 Native American human remains, culturally identified, that were in boxes stored in shelves under the control of the state of Colorado. And so we set out with History Colorado and some amazing staff and tribal leaders to advocate for a federal change, to advocate for a state change. And we ended up meeting with 48 tribes who all agreed that they called Colorado home as well, that a treaty or different policy over that last 150 years forced them out of the state. It took us 3 years to meet with these tribes. And if you're wondering who those tribes are, this is who they are. There's 19 pueblos in New Mexico down here. There's the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes from Oklahoma, Northern Cheyenne in Montana. There are tribes from the Dakotas, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo is in Texas. So that's how far these tribes were pushed when not just Colorado, but the West had an Indian problem. And a way for our displacement needed the fact that it was because of our displacement opened up the area and the avenue to develop Denver, Colorado Springs, the Front Range. Now, this presentation's about beyond land acknowledgements, but I also want to highlight some really interesting things we've seen in Colorado. If you haven't been keeping up, because I have, and obviously to provide this information. And I think it started long ago when Colorado established the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs, that I had the honor of being the executive director there for many years. Colorado's Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs, or Colorado's Commission of Indian Affairs, is chaired by our Lieutenant Governor, Diane Primavera. And we are the only state that requires our Lieutenant Governor as a statutory responsibility that he or she takes that role. They chair the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs. They ensure the government to government relationship. That was enacted in the 70s. And I think over this time frame, we've seen the development of strengthening, building stronger relationships between tribes and states. This is just one example of an amazing example that I had the opportunity to be a part of when then former Governor John Hickenlooper apologized on the state's role on behalf of the state as it was related to the Sand Creek Massacre. And if you don't know about the Sand Creek Massacre, I encourage you to check that out. Then we start seeing the movement around American Indian mascots. Clearly, you all have seen maybe obviously the national conversation with national sports teams. But then we started diving in here at K through 12. And at the time, there was over 40 public schools, K through 12, that utilized some type of depiction of an American Indian. I love this photograph that one of our friends and advocates put together to depict this struggle, right? As a Native student versus in real life versus a caricature. This is actually clip art. It wasn't designed by any Native American artists. Then we start seeing the name changing proposals, land acknowledgments. This picture on the left is the Gore Mountain Range, which many of you in Summit County, if you live there, you drive through that area, you pass it all the time. And the Gore Mountain Range sprawls from Frisco to Kremlin. It was named after this aristocrat, Lord Gore, and the effort by the county for many years has been trying to work with the tribes to change the name of that. It was also bringing more tribal leaders and indigenous voices to the community. At this time, this picture on the right was a community listening to some of our former tribal leaders talk about Ute history and culture there in Frisco. And then I think it brings us back around land acknowledgements. I bring up the Fort Lewis College land acknowledgement. And for those who have received the pre-readings or the links, if they're not posted, we can post it for the much larger audience. But talking about what is a land acknowledgement? Why do a land acknowledgement? When not to do a land acknowledgement. So it gives you different perspectives. Some friends of mine and great speakers have challenged both sides. When do you do and when do you not do them? This one was interesting because I think there wasn't, I mean, there probably still is about every week I get a question about a land acknowledgement and should you do and when to do and then also rightfully so, if you do one, is that going to be, you don't want to be perceived of just doing one because that's what all the cool kids are doing. And you're seeing all these great articles in Outside Magazine and other places talking about clearly how you can screw up if you do one incorrectly. But I would say the majority of higher education institutions in Colorado actually now utilize a land acknowledgement. So as we get into the Q&A with CMC and the future ahead, I think what was so important for Fort Lewis College, which started out as an Indian boarding school, that I might add. So there's a huge history there that we need to talk about, and we're starting to talk about that. But the land acknowledgement could not have come unless the students, the faculty, and the staff were a part of it, the indigenous voice, that it wasn't the board of trustees, it wasn't the president that just said, hey, this is what we should be doing, this is like the best thing we should be doing right now. It cannot start there. And it has to go beyond acknowledgements. Now, my personal opinion is I do appreciate land acknowledgements, but I appreciate them because they're supposed to just plant the seed. They're not supposed to be the end point. What I mean by that is you're supposed to have an ongoing conversation with tribes. You're supposed to utilize that opportunity to build relationships with your indigenous communities, building more classes, building ongoing relationships both on and off your communities, outside your communities, inviting them. It needs to be a long-term commitment. It can't just be something that you highlight in a report or the 10-year management plan and gets shelved that no one's going to see, or even just this cool quote you get to put on your website. It can't be that. It cannot be false. And if it comes with that, then you're going to find that it's going to fail. And so that's where the effort has to come in there. I think now, which was interesting because maybe hopefully I can prime this conversation for folks out there willing to ask it, or even we can get into it if it's not. When do you go from land acknowledgement to land back? Because that's what our indigenous community is asking now. We appreciate the outreach. We appreciate coming to the table. But my father's best quote, he used to always tell me, was he'd go to meetings with the federal government and, he'd get time and time again, there would be it was always paper water. It was never real water for water rights settlement. And he would, after leaving it, he would always say that being at the table was so important. And for so long, if you weren't at the table, you're on the menu. And that's been the indigenous community. That's been tribes. That's been the federal policy. As I've highlighted here, moving into the future, that's what we hope to change. So one thing, and I'm going to close down here and then get to the questions, is a battle at Milk Creek. This followed the Meeker, it's called Meeker Massacre in probably a lot of the history books, but we're emphasizing, we call it the Meeker Incident, where Nathan Meeker took up an Indian agent. He was the first Indian agent for the state of Colorado. And his good friend Horace Greeley had talked him into getting this role. And if he got this role, then maybe he could get a straight shot to being the first governor of the state of Colorado, or maybe even the president of the United States. Nathan Meeker wrote several articles that were published in this newsletter. And outside of Meeker, Colorado, there is a dirt road that you can take to get up to Kremling. I encourage you to go off the beaten path, check it out, because you're going to go into this valley and you're going to see these two monuments. So they look way out of their place in this huge valley that you see in this picture here. And every year it's great because there's an honoring by the community, the local historical society there. And they invite the Ute Indian tribe, particularly the Northern Utes in Utah, who were forced back to that community to honor what happened there and recognize what happened there. And I took this picture, that celebration of this little girl. She's a member of the Ute Indian tribe in Utah. Because as a reminder to myself and to people what I'm giving this presentation to, that had Nathan Meeker had the time frame of what Territorial Governor Evans wanted at the time, she would not be here. I would not be here. We were the Indian problem of the time. And why it was such an encouragement to continue building the curriculum, continue telling you history, and ongoing moving into the future. I think this is my last two slides, and if you saw this on Crow Canyon, I also talk about this one. This is where the Utes went, the three bands pushed to the south of southern Colorado. And this is a Ute family in Mancos, Colorado. If you've been to Mesa Verde National Park, Mancos Canyon is the biggest canyon that feeds up to Mesa, what is now Mesa Verde National Park. And the families would be there, and there would be a field nurse sent by the federal government. It's this lady on the right side, if you can make the picture out. She's tall, she has a long trench coat. She would go and she would check on the families. She would make any additions if any new births were done, if there was any deaths, she'd make record of that. And then she would also bring sugar and some supplies, sugar, flour, and she would also bring red paint. And red paint was for those Ute families that had livestock. This family never had livestock. They never could afford livestock. And so what they did was they painted the walls, those sandstone walls behind them, different pictures, buffalo, cattle. You might see to the left of the lady on the far left, there's a man on a horse. That man actually is supposed to be Chief Jack House. You can tour this site. It's called Chief Jack House Hogan site. This is where Chief Jack House was born and raised. And it's also a very special place for me and my family, because you see two women. The woman on the far left was the grandmother. And then, but right next to her, to the right, kneeling down, there's a little boy. There's also another little girl. But there's a head, almost a black spot right between both of their heads. A little boy who was scared to come out for the picture. And that was my father, Ernest House Sr. He was born here. We never really knew what year. It was the late 40s that this picture was taken. And soon after that, he was taken from his family and he was sent to an Indian boarding school in Ignacio, Colorado, which we're talking about today. Or not today, but in today's conversation. This story is not a new story to many different Native families in the Southwest and throughout the United States. This time frame and the incorporation of Indian boarding schools, both on reservation and off, really started and were full-fledged at that time. I bring that as a reminder because the 1940s, that's not that long ago. And the last 150 years of Ute history in Colorado, what we're talking about, is also not long ago as we compare it to Ute history for the last thousands and thousands of years. I encourage you, you can go to this spot, it's the Ute Mountain Tribal Park. I think it's one of the best kept secrets in Colorado, in southwestern Colorado. Look it up, Google it, check it out. Hopefully, maybe I might be down there, maybe join your tour and show you this. That's me at that same spot. I grew up as being a tribal park tour guide in the late 90s and had the opportunity and honor to work with my father down there. It was great. I'm going to end now with you because I think we're going to get into some questions. I just, again, want to say thank you, Towaoc. It means thank you in Ute. On behalf of me, my family, thank you so much for the opportunity to do this and be
here. It's truly a pleasure, and thank you for your presentation and the opportunity to engage with you. I wanted to make a mention. We might go a little bit past our original stop time since we started a little bit late. But essentially what we're doing now is we're transitioning to kind of a conversation between Ernest and myself, picking up off of the items that he presented, and then we'll transition into a broader Q&A. I guess I should preface some of this and thank you, Matt, and all of the other organizers of this event. This is a really powerful opportunity. I also want to acknowledge to folks on the call to have the opportunity to engage in a conversation with an anthropologist and a tribal member is one that can always come up. You can always come up with interesting outcomes. Anthropologists, I believe, had the dubious honor of being some of the first, I would say, Western advocates of tribal lands and cultures. But by doing so, their road to hell was paved with all kinds of good intentions, right? Of trying to do right by tribal groups, but kind of bumbling their way throughout. If anyone wants to look at a comedic interpretation of this on YouTube, I would encourage checking out Floyd Red Crow Westerman's song, Here Come the Anthros. The subtitle is Hide Your Cultures Away, all right? And so I want to acknowledge that, at least acknowledge my positionality as a first generation academic, first generation college student, as a son of immigrants, who in many ways, studying in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, bumbling around a lacrosse field, ending up in a place like Albuquerque, New Mexico, I didn't realize all of the indigeneity that I was surrounded by and that I came from. And so this stuff can be really hard. And this is where, Ernest, I ask, we're in this mode right now. We're willing to embrace these acknowledgments, but we want to go beyond acknowledgments. We want to go, we're willing to lean in to try to rectify historical trauma, but we also have to reconcile our shame, our remorse. We need to, I think, acknowledge the fact that many of us, the majority of the populations in the West, are settler colonialists. These are terms like historic trauma, settler colonialism. Like, these are things that folks who feel they fought hard to be in this land get a little bit troubled with. And so I'd like to know, I mean, at least from your experience, Ernest, working with Fort Lewis College, what are some suggestions for how we can better integrate higher ed with tribal communities to try to, can I say, rectify the ills of the past? Can we forge a better path forward? What does it mean to go from acknowledgement and then truly take actions? I know that's a heady and a deep question. And I appreciate you setting us up with a lot of the background information. But I'd like to initiate with that. I mean, we're in this point on MLK Day where Martin Luther King spoke greatly for civil rights and economic justice. These are things we're seeing in tribal lands that are not reaching those areas. And in many cases, like with Standing Rock, we are still building our careers on the shoulders of others who continue to struggle. All right, I'll be quiet, but Ernest, again, thanks. And you know, what are your thoughts? What are either some suggestions or remedies or ways forward, dialogue? Who knows?
Well, it's such a great question, and it's the number one question, right? And that's why I'm always hopeful that, you know, these are entry points, that your deep dive is going to be a different process. What I mean yours, meaning CMC's, is going to be a different path than Fort Lewis College. It's going to be a different path than Colorado State University. I mean, there's a whole other list right there. I mean, Colorado State University and Fort Lewis College are the only two Colorado land grant institutions in the state. Now, there's all types of conversations if folks want to Google land grant institutions and land back, right, to tribes that can make a connection that's how states got the land grant in the first place, was because they did the treaty and broke the treaty with tribes, and then all of a sudden they have land. So back to your question though, and this is what I tell people that I work with, the city of Boulder, who's having this conversation right now around consultation, Fort Collins, all kinds of different folks that are looking to start their conversation. I say usually four things come to mind. One is go slow to go fast. If you have not worked with Indian country, you need to get educated about the community you're working with, the individuals, like this conversation, inviting people there to tell the administration, the staff, maybe it's the native students, giving them that opportunity to tell you where they're from in Indian country, what their tribe is, what their tribal affiliations are. And I think a lot of times, because we're all, including myself, we're all run by this device in our hands, and it tells me when to go to meetings and when to send emails, and I have deadlines and everything like that. So, but when you're working with, and as you probably know, Professor, because you worked with tribes before, there's no timeline there. And we shouldn't be on a timeline. It's about relationship building first and foremost. I need to know who you are. Let's sit down and have some coffee. I want to hear where you're coming from. Where's your heart coming at this? And that takes time. And because it doesn't hit certain benchmarks, because maybe it might not meet the ROI timeline that everybody has, then it's shoved to the side and saying, oh, we tried, never mind. So that's why I say go slow to go fast. You know, tribal communities, we know when someone's heart is in it. We know if you're truly serious about this. The second is collaboration happens at the speed of trust. Let's be honest. The relationship that's had between the federal government and a lot of states too, and tribes, it's not the best history. We're still reeling from that. You talked about historical trauma. We need to pull more things out like that. So in order to build that trust, that collaboration really needs to happen, or else it won't go anywhere. And then I think the third, well, I talked about becoming educated and getting involved and including your community involved in the process. Excuse me. And then the fourth is develop relationships with tribal nations, indigenous communities. I get it. CMC campus may be several hours away from the nearest tribe. A lot of people ask that same thing. Would a tribe even want to come here? You also have tribal citizens living in your county. There are, excuse me, and I'll have to switch to get some water and your next question, Patrick, but Colorado today, 2% of the state's population identifies as American Indian. Very similar to nationally, 2% of the United States population identifies as American Indian, 2%. Okay, in Colorado, we have American Indians in all 64 counties represented. There are families that live in these communities that grew up there. They want the voice and opportunity. And I think that the conversation needs to broaden more than just, yes, I think you should, because tribes have tribal historic preservation offices, as you know, cultural offices that can feed into that can help drive that conversation if and when you get into a government to government conversation. There are also community members who have been waiting a very long time to engage in this conversation. And so I think for those 4 points, I would just encourage you all to do that. When we look back at Fort Lewis College and our history, clearly, I mean, starting with the boarding school, that's already going to be a difficult conversation. When moving now, we should not be moving without tribal direction. Tribal engagement, tribal involvement, tribes leading the conversation. Not just us, even though as a Native American sitting on the board of trustees of Fort Lewis College, cannot be dictated like that. Tribes have to be the ones to move that, or else it's not going to be successful.
Ernest, thank you. You want to grab a swig of water? I don't blame you. You've been going for a while, and this is this is really powerful. I'd like to get to something more tangible with regard to kind of the role of anthropologists, as you mentioned, in tribal lands. As you mentioned, these date stamps, right? Anthropologists are constantly credited with kind of pointing to these year zeros, right? And you mentioned 10,000, 12,000 years versus an understanding of being present in a particular place since time immemorial. I'd love to hear about your experience, and I wish that when I had gone to the Ute Tribal Park, I had you as the guide, and I will take you up on the offer to go visit together. I've struggled as an anthropologist. My work is in Mesoamerica, but I do a lot of engagement in the Four Corners region. In Mesoamerica, there's a lot of integration with the way that we tell the story about the past. It seems that it's more fluid. When I get into places like Mesa Verde National Park, and I have rangers, as of recently, they're beginning to temper their speech and qualify things by saying that they are not the Aboriginal experts. They are only really secondary or tertiary to understanding knowledge. I'd love to know, as I imagine many people on the call, those of you that are Colorado history buffs, national park buffs, you may or may not know of the Ute Tribal Park that has more, I would say more like, what do you say, eye candy, or more just stuff to learn about from other worldviews. I'd love to know what your experience was like as being a guide there, and kind of juxtaposed to the very same federal government that implemented a lot of these policies that were really just words. You talked about paper water, and in many ways there was paper treaties, and then bang, Mesa Verde appears upon this place. It's my own personal curiosity, what it must have been like to either have to tell a multitude of stories at the same time, or to almost deconstruct a predominant narrative in order to gain a foothold, so to speak, in this world of academic and sort of just popular inquiry into our collective past. If you would share a little bit more about your experience in that realm, I'd really be impressed.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's such a great question, because I think a lot of people, when we advocated for that change in 2007 for Colorado to be the first state to address this loophole in NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which was culturally unidentifiable. For folks who don't know, Colorado has about between 12 and 15 inadvertently discovered Native American human remains found every year. That's mostly due to natural erosion, right? But with the growth that we're seeing in your communities and mountain towns on the Front Range and the whole state of the population, the housing expansions, we're gonna uncover more Native American human remains. And that means that the coordination with tribes to make sure that those remains get back to who they belong to is important. But primarily, I think that what was one of the things that helped immensely, and they're individuals that I think about now, archaeologists, curators, people like Bridget Ambler, people like Richard Wilshusen, these individuals that are facilitating the conversation and still continue to do today. I often look at their challenge. And so I almost put the question back to you, Professor, because I think a lot of times science and traditional knowledge were coming head to head. And there was only so far that I was going to take what you told me or what you believe to be true based on your teachings, your classes, you know, where you're coming from. And yet there was also only so far you could go with me telling you that we as Utes truly believe we've been here since time immemorial, that we were created from these mountains, you know? And so we had to find the nexus to where science and traditional knowledge weren't pushing each other out of it, so much so that you were walking away from the table. And that understanding can continue to maintain. It can go simultaneously. I don't have to be completely persuaded or even share all of that information. And that's also a concern on the tribal side. We've seen when we share our history, we've seen when we share information and it's quickly out of our control. And the next thing you know, it's in some history book, it's out of our control, it's out of our perspective. It's in some new movie, that all that's out of our hands. So that's also a concern to us because all of these they're so important. They're oral traditions and they've been passed down through generation to generation. And so I think that the conversation is still going on today. I'm involved in a couple different conversations around ancient DNA collection and the ethics of that. And, we're still fascinated with this conversation of where we come from. 23andMe, Ancestry.com. I have friends that call me up. Hey man, I found out I was 10% Native American. And when I was at the state, the number one phone call I would get was from somebody saying, hey, how do I get my free money? I know that Indians get free money from the federal government. I know that all my taxes go to them. You guys have these casinos, you guys are rolling in money. How do I get that? I think at some point I was lost. And I know that someone in my family, and it was starting from that point, just in that particular conversation and going back was so hard. And now I think the conversation around where we fit, where American Indian history fits, where your history fits in this whole world is an ongoing conversation as we'll continue to do that. And where I see an opening for CMC is having the indigenous voices, perspectives, students, faculty, staff, feed that conversation. Why shouldn't higher education be developing indigenous pedagogy models, curriculum from the indigenous standpoint to feed that conversation and to move that conversation going forward? Because we know what the other perspective has seen. We know what the other perspective has shown us since indigenous communities have been here. And so that's what I guess the challenge is. And that's what I would encourage CMC and staff to be thinking and pushing for, because that land acknowledgement at Fort Lewis College, it wasn't until, and I'm no longer the chair of the board of, I've served as chair for 2 years, but that opened the door for me as the board chair to read that acknowledgement before every board trustee meeting. That might have not meant anything to anybody else, but I got to tell you how much it meant to me and to my family members, my relatives, who have always seen that higher education institution and hoping that there was a connection there. That then led into the acknowledgement being printed on every course syllabus that the college had to offer. Then that led into having our Native American students, which Fort Lewis College has a 30% of our student population identifies as Native American. Over 250 plus tribes are represented on our campus. But that also led into, why can't indigenous students wear traditional regalia instead of cap and gowns? People were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. If we're talking about colonial settler timeframe versus academia, versus where you're going to challenge the status quo, just so that your student can feel comfortable in your class, on your campus, and feel inspired to lead, if not maybe become that next professor and teach that class. That's exactly the seed that we need to be planting.
Wow, Ernest, thank you so much. I have one other inquiry, and then I'm going to turn the floor to some of our open Q&A questions. And thank you for sharing that. My goodness, yes, the significance of the land acknowledgement as it evolves into a common statement across our, kind of a cultural change. That's my curiosity at this point is something to do with my experience in New Mexico. With a lot of urban natives, urban Indians that would leave their reservations to come to study at the University of New Mexico, or that come to study at CMC or Fort Lewis. I'm curious about that sort of juxtaposition. And as I'm thinking through this question, I'm almost thinking you'll probably say we have to ask this of ourselves. Is it still that when the youth go to be educated in the white system that there is still a disjuncture? Are you sensing that? I mean, the numbers at Fort Lewis seem amazing. And a lot of our students that go from CMC to Fort Lewis or come back to CMC, they do recount that the culture is visible, it's palpable. They are friends and engaged on a day-to-day basis around different worldviews, around different timelines. But does your sense that in general, in the West, in the Four Corners, in Colorado, sort of, are we still antiquated in that sense that we are almost, westernizing people of tribal origins? And what should we do better? Your 4 indications are amazing. Does it emanate from tribal acknowledgement? Does it emanate from statements on syllabi? What would you suggest? Again, we're leaning on you heavily to help us blaze a better path forward. But I know that there still is a lot of that sort of, can I call it animosity? Can I call it distrust? I think it may be a level of distrust based on lack of inclusivity, but I'd love to hear your take, being a formal member of Fort Lewis College and a representative of the Ute Mountain Ute. Where are we and where can we go?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with the challenge that I think a lot of tribal leaders find themselves in today. In the 2010 census, the United States Census, over 70%, over 72% of the United States American Indian population lived off of the reservation at that moment. Now it's 2010. Over 70% of the total US population lived off of the reservation at that point. Those who identify and would live on a reservation. By the 2020 census, I haven't got the formal number yet. I'm almost positive that's over 80%. And why that's difficult to tribal leadership is a couple things that you want to give your young leaders, young people, the opportunity they want, right? To do whatever they want. Many tribes offer scholarships to go to, Fort Lewis is a Native American serving institution, clearly, and we have this tuition waiver program, which is a whole nother conversation, but you have tribal colleges, you have other programs now that offer discounts. I think Colorado Mountain College is one of those that initiated this, which I didn't know, which was long before we started having this conversation a couple of years ago around either discounted rates or in-state tuition now that we have in Colorado for any of those students that are members of those 48 tribes that we fought so hard to get recognition of in 2007. My point is that it's so important. And I feel like smaller institutions like CMC have almost more flexibility for programs and certification programs that you have within your wheelhouse to partner up with remote tribes to offer distance learning opportunities. Look, we know pre-pandemic broadband was nowhere for rural reservation communities, it was a joke. Even still today, even though we're building the infrastructure on Ute Mountain, if the wind blows hard enough, your email's out. How are we going to get 700 kids that are now K through 12 that are distance learning? The infrastructure couldn't be built fast enough to support that. My whole point is that all that's now coming back online, the partnerships that rural tribal communities will need, if it's chapter houses, if it's tribal council chambers, if it's educational programs. We started the state's first tribal charter school in Colorado this last August. It's a K through first grade. We're going to add second grade this year. But the point is more and more of these opportunities are coming out, and they need partnerships in the higher education. We need teachers. You all seen the data with the teacher shortage across rural Colorado. And then you look at Southwestern Colorado and same thing. That type of involvement, it's not just a, hey, Fort Lewis College or, CSU issue. I would love to have the opportunity and to have CMC have that conversation with not just Ute Mountain, but with tribes that are more rural, that you have specialized degrees or certificates in to be able to provide those jobs so that those students can feel that they're gaining that class, staying in their community, not having to leave, and then also having a good paying job when they return home. That's one of the biggest challenges for our indigenous population.
Thank you so much, Ernest. Yeah, it is incredibly multifaceted. I think it's at some level a lot of introspection at the level of the institution, and openness and willingness to embrace some of the challenging aspects of this collective history. We've been getting a good amount of questions in the Q&A portion, and what I'm going to do is transition to our moderators, Jeremiah and Kevin, who've been fielding some of these questions. We've had folks responding in real time, and so I'm going to transition away. Ernest, do know I'll follow up with you for that tour at the Ute Tribal Park. I'm really just thankful that you were willing to spend the time with us today. And yes, this is the beginning of a robust conversation on how to be and serve all of the groups that we intend to serve in the ways that they would like us to serve them. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn the floor over to Jeremiah and Kevin. Thanks again.
Thanks, Patrick.
Oh, I have Kevin frozen on my end.
Yeah, I think you may have froze too. Jeremiah, would you mind?
Yep, I can take the ball here. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Ernest, for that. That was wonderful. If Kevin gets back online, there you are, Kevin.
Sorry, of course, technology, right? Apologies for that. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Ernest, very much for being here today. Really appreciate it. Quite a few questions coming through in the Q&A. And for those in the audience, just please continue to use that as your vehicle for giving us questions. Something that came up kind of around the Gore Range discussion. People are wondering what are some of the supporting and opposing positions kind of in the community regarding name changes in Colorado, similar to what you talked about with the Gore Range.
Great question. And not just, I think, Gore Range, but most recently, I think you've seen Governor Polis announce and create this naming commission. I can't remember the formal name of the naming commission is, but bring some different folks around the table, and really long overdue looking at some just outdated terms that we have in some of the areas around Colorado. And I think one of the most recent ones was working with representatives of Cheyenne-Arapaho tribes around a mountain that was offensively named, had an offensive native name, and changing it, working with the tribes to change that to the more appropriate name, Mustehi Mountain, I believe. And it's that type of coordination, collaboration is great. I mean, we're seeing the same questions coming in, and you know, one thing that I've talked about as well is Mount Evans, and even more recently, like in this last fall, a few months ago at Fort Lewis College, because of our boarding school history, we had these panels in a clock tower, and they just did not have the correct depiction of the time. They showed these pictures of Indian students going to this boarding school and smiling, and you know, it was in Western dress, haircut, you know, the whole process of the time. We need to tell a better story of the true depiction of what happened. And so not just the place names, not just the recognition of history. Now we're starting to actually ask questions of, well, what is that true history? And, you know, it's interesting because I've had people ask me, well, how far do you take it? What's too far, right? And, or I didn't know that, and that's not the history that I grew up with. How do I know that that history is true? You know, these questions that continue to come up are important ones. And like the information I just shared at the Battle at Milk Creek, outside of Meeker, Colorado, in their schools, which I'd heard that it actually was taught, I was shocked to say the majority of students, they either don't talk about Sand Creek Massacre, don't know about Battle of Milk Creek. And granted, that's just one small example. There's a lot of history there. But Indian education in the state of Colorado needs to be required in the state of Colorado. Communities are having these questions from Pitkin County to Summit County, the Northwest, I mean, all four corners of the state, not just where I grew up with, where I grew up, which is on the Ute Mountain Reservation. And so having these type of collaborations around name change proposals, and I think some people find it kind of surprising, but for me, it's still along this path to truth and reconciliation. Now, after apartheid in South Africa, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was developed. Same thing with Aborigines in Australia. So, and also up north to Canada and First Nations people. So land acknowledgements and truth around history started coming out more and more so. And we're seeing what's going on with boarding schools up and that impact and that conversation up in Canada as well. I don't throw around reconciliation very lightly. I just want to say that. I don't know, maybe we'll never get to full reconciliation. But the recognition, the awareness, the acknowledgement, all that stuff can come together. And why aren't we, if we know that we're trying to better our relationship and our people and the communities, and that's a part of it, especially when tribes have been wanting to share this for so long. And so I guess I look at the name change process, I'm supportive of it, but I hope that the education follows it so that you just don't go by another mountain or creek or place and go, oh, that was changed. And that was changed just like a couple years ago. I don't even know why that was changed. We need to know why that is, why people have fought for that process and why we're trying and what it means today. And so I think that's should come along with that, that name change.
Thank you. And kind of along those lines, someone has asked the question, you mentioned the idea of going from land acknowledgement to land back. What are your thoughts on that? If you could go a little more detail in the idea of acknowledgement versus the land back.
Absolutely. And there are many in Native American community who we're seeing examples of land back, local governments. Actually, I know of a couple here in Colorado that are asking the same question. If we do have a parcel of property, how do we transfer that back? Who do we transfer it to? How does that process work? Would a tribe even want that, or the tribal community? And I think that's where engaging the tribal relationship is so important, that you're giving them the opportunity to respond to that, what that looks like moving forward, and what that land back initiative actually is. And does that mean full just transfer over? Is it, what are the plans for that? Not that it shouldn't be dictated by the individual, the local government. It should be open to the conversation to tribes to make sure where that process goes. And so I think the land acknowledgement in a couple of these examples have opened up the discussion to say, wow, on the Front Range, there's not as many traditional practitioners of Native American spirituality who utilize sweat lodge ceremonies, because the growth of housing in communities and the places that they would usually go to are now, they don't have access to that anymore. How can we do that? So it's not only land back, but it's cultural resource management at a local government arena, where after 10-year, 15-year process, people are asking, well, should we have asked tribes? Should we have communicated with tribes? Or maybe we know of this cultural site. It's not publicly known, but maybe it's been on our books as just this cultural site. We need to engage in further conversation. So the land back conversation could come in a variety of areas, but the whole point is to have the tribe at the table to engage in that conversation and community members, so that the future is really controlled by them, what they would like to see. Maybe it turns into a resource center. Maybe it turns into an education component that is coordinated with the college. All of that could be a process of it, but really that type of coordination with tribal voices, tribal involvement need to take place.
Okay, thank you. And there are some questions that have been answered already. So thanks for those that have done some of that. Something else that's come up. So CMC has recently received a designation of being Hispanic serving institution. The question was just trying to understand if this designation, how does this enable the college to better pursue equitable and just spaces for indigenous communities and other BIPOC community members in our region at the same time?
Well, I mean, I think this is, so here's the other thing, I guess I maybe in this conversation, people have noticed, I've done it a little bit more so, I maybe haven't done it as much as this one, but I use tribal and indigenous interchangeably, but we need to be very particular and specific about it as well, because when I talk about tribes, I'm often referring to, especially in the work with Colorado, federally recognized tribes. Even the 48 historic tribes of Colorado, those are all federally recognized. The 2 here in Colorado, Ute Mountain, Southern Ute, are federally recognized. That type of government to government relationship, that's a separate conversation. There's a much larger indigenous population that I also think should be recognized and included in conversation, especially particularly this question. If CMC is identified now as a Hispanic serving institution, not only are there additional grants to be able to follow that, but the engagement, including the indigenous population, Hispanic indigenous population, that have also called like Southern Colorado home for many years prior to Colorado being a state as well. We're having a similar conversation with History Colorado. If you go through the San Luis Valley, Fort Garland Museum, maybe you saw a New York Times article about it, which was probably about a month ago, around indigenous enslavement. That conversation's coming about right now as well. That the indigenous population, that also includes individuals from Mexican tribes that were historically there, and integrating with, I mean, the Utes, we speak a Uto-Aztecan language. We're related to the Aztecs linguistically. And there was trade routes through Mexico, up through indigenous tribes and Native American tribes that we know of today. And so I think that what I see as awesome opportunity is where, and now we're talking about the Hispanic community, Latino community, and the connection of tribes today and historically, but also our BIPOC community, and including Black and Indigenous voices, and the LGBTQ community, two-spirited communities. I mean, there's so much there, and I would just, I guess, encourage CMC to think outside of the box now that you have this this opportunity to engage more with the Hispanic community, as also seeing an opportunity for both tribal representation, Hispanic and Latino combination, because there's so much interconnection, especially in Southern Colorado.
Thank you, Ernest. I'll grab the next question we've got from the audience. With Canada recognizing and apologizing for uncovered mass graves at Native re-education schools, what's the truth about Colorado's history with those schools that we don't see on the news?
Wow. That's a powerful question. And it's hard because I'm just reflecting on my work with Fort Lewis College, and I'm just one person. I just had a conversation earlier this week with some of the faculty and staff who've pushed the same thing, who asked the same exact questions. But internally, what is our history, Fort Lewis College history? What don't we know? What more do we need to find out? And Colorado has 4 boarding schools in our state's history. 2 off reservation and 2 on. The Fort Lewis College, after the Sand Creek Massacre, the federal government was concerned that there was going to be an Indian uprisal in retaliation for what happened at Sand Creek to the Cheyenne and Arapaho people. So they built a fort outside of Pagosa Springs, Colorado. And since that revolt didn't maybe come to what they were expecting, they moved that fort to Hesperus, Colorado, right outside of Durango. And young children from the surrounding tribes were sent there. Now, not long after Fort Lewis College or the Fort Lewis boarding school, there was the Teller Institute outside of right next in Grand Junction, Colorado. Same thing. Now, this was a time, and I think Professor Stave, you said that you're from Carlisle, and this was a time where by the late 1800s, that the biggest impact the federal government on Indian education was that if you remove the child from your family, it cuts and severs that connection faster. So the transition and the assimilation works faster. This is what their report said. You can go look it up. The assimilation of these Indian kids were going to happen faster if they were physically removed from their community. If you cut their hair, if you forbid them to speak their native tongue, if you put them in Western dress, if you introduce them to a Western society, then the severs of those ties would happen faster. When that was not working at the speed that they wanted, then on-reservation boarding schools took place. And so a boarding school was put in Ignacio, Colorado, on the Southern Indian Reservation, and on the Ute Mountain Ute Reservation, my reservation. Just in my experience, my father went to the Ignacio one, was sent to the Ignacio one, because the one at Ute Mountain had not opened up yet. And I said this in my comment of the panel removal discussion this last fall at Fort Lewis College, and I haven't shared this. It's only come within recently that I've shared this because it's very personal to me. That it wasn't until later in my father's life that he would talk about it. And the biggest impact that I remember that for me was that he broke out. He was able to escape. And where that boarding school was to where the picture that I showed you, that black and white photograph of where his family was in this canyon, at the bottom of this canyon, where the Utes were sent to pretty much die. That's where he was running back to. And that was over 100 miles away. And he might have been 10 or 11. I don't know if it was snowing. I don't know if it was raining. I don't know what the weather looked like. But I got to tell you, I have a 9 and 11-year-old right now. And I drive that all the time from Ignacio, Colorado, back to Cortez. He didn't have a flashlight. Where he was going was, he could have easily died in that transition. My point of why I think the boarding school history is so important, just like Dr. King's quote when I very first started this conversation, is there have been federal policies to eradicate my people from this earth that we do not talk about. And it wasn't just, the onset of exploration or the myths that we call that people found this place or that place. It's happened simultaneously over and over and over. And part of that historical trauma is addressing that. We have a generation that wants to go to CMC. We have indigenous students that want to go to Fort Lewis. They want to go and get a certificate program. They want to do whatever it is they want to do. And this story that we're telling now, a lot of times parents would not let their kids go to these schools because of what happened, because of the impact. And that's what we need to address. All of that is within the boarding school history. The data, the numbers, the locations, all that stuff will come out. It's the impact on generations removed that we do not talk about enough of, that we need to start talking about.
Okay, I think I'm jumping in. We went a couple minutes over because we had a little technology glitch at the beginning. But just want to, again, thank all of you for listening in today who are out there in cyberspace. Certainly thank all of our internal team that helped curate today's conversation, Patrick, Kevin, Jeremiah, Richard, Matt, and others. And certainly we want to thank Ernest. Ernest, I saw in the background, we had county commissioners on the screen today, Steve Child, who I think he mentioned behind the scenes that he knew your dad, Pitkin County Commissioner, former Summit County Commissioner, and city leaders and others. So we've certainly had our internal staff and faculty and students, but we've also had some from members of the public join in today, which is great. I would just underscore, if you ever have an opportunity to visit the Ute Tribal Mountain Park, it is spectacular, really, really special. So put it on your bucket list. There's been conversation and requests today about the video of today's discussion. Not everybody could join. We will edit out the bumpy parts at the beginning and make sure it's a smooth recording, and we will make that available on our website. So look for that within the next couple of days or so. And then I just want to go back to my introductory comments and just mention that we do have a couple of very distinct opportunities coming up, and that is how we potentially think differently about some land that the college owns in the Four Corners region near in Montezuma County. And that I know Patrick has been to, and our students have been to, I've been to, and we have an opportunity to think maybe differently about that. So there was some question about sort of whether it's land acknowledgement or land return or whatever, and that might be an interesting opportunity and gesture for us. So I would welcome our community to weigh in on that as we move forward and as our Board of Trustees contemplates that. And then I think something that's really, really powerful is that we have a new program coming on, our bachelor's degree in ecosystem science and stewardship. What a better way to think about indigenous perspectives and history as we design and build that program. So we're now public and on the record in that regard. And Ernest, we might look to you and others to help us think through that. So again, just want to thank everyone for joining today. I would maybe close by just saying it's never too late to begin an important conversation, ever. And hopefully that turns into action. And that's certainly the spirit of today, and honoring Dr. King. And again, so I will just close by saying again, thank you, Ernest, so much for being with us, for your family heritage, and for continuing to help us be part of a long-term dialogue. So thank you so much for being with us, and to all of you out there. Thanks again.
Towaoc.